True growth comes when you stop looking at supplements as opposites. Expansion doesn't mean you don't improve quality, diversification doesn't mean you don't add depth. Very good morning to the esteemed panel of judges here today, representing the Sri Ram College of Commerce from the University of Delhi. It is our honor to present our case solution, or rather vision, for Finvolution. I'm Parth Chaudhary and I'm accompanied by my teammates Ronak Singh, Jaini Shah, and Pratham Kalra. So to give you a brief understanding of how we've planned our 20 minutes, we'll start by understanding the company, understanding the context, and also trying to understand Indonesia as a market and a set of people. Then we'll move on to the key issues that we think we'll be facing in our market entry strategy here today. Then we'll look at the options that we have in terms of a solution landscape. We'll justify our choice, and then we'll go into more details with regards to our solution. After that, we'll shift gears to implementation, try to understand a proposed timeline, the risks that we foresee, and end by talking of a conclusion in terms of trying to establish certain key quantifiable targets that we have for our business, especially in the Indonesian market. In doing so, we try to ensure that we'll be able to explain to you not just why we want to do things, but what we want to do and how we want to execute them. Now, talking about Finvolution, in its 14 plus years of existence, it has always been a disruptor. It started off in its Chinese market as one of the first, or probably the first, P2P lending platform. In that sense, it has always been one which has challenged the status quo. Now, how we see it, there are two broad legs to its business. The first is in terms of a platform which enables borrowers and lenders to find each other and hence acts as an intermediary. Here, our primary value addition is in terms of add-ons like a virtual collection agent and the models that we have. But talking about the models, that becomes our second aspect, which is a scalable and customizable IT infrastructure which we've developed with time, which is a set of tested models and programs that we not only use ourselves, but can also sell to other companies in terms of a modular fashion.
We look at the core problems and we understand that it's something that we need to do differently. Firstly, how do we exactly penetrate the Indonesian market given its uncompetitive fintech landscape for now? Secondly, do we then go ahead and replicate Chinese success in Indonesia, or do we try to adapt Finvolution's business model differently? And thirdly, after doing all these two things right, how do you expand your scope of offerings and the depth of offerings in order to better cater to the Indonesian customer? We look at the Indonesia's economic pyramid and we realize that today 203 million people are microfinance customers that are basically unbanked as well. By using our service offerings, not only we want to bring them to the conventional banking system, but also better the system for existing customers as well, who for the longest time have been using conventional banking and insurance services in the country. Next slide, please. We look at the hurdles that might be there while we're talking about entering Indonesia. Firstly, we talk about limited accessibility, which occurs in two forms, right? One, access to formal credit, with only 13% of people having access to formal credit. And secondly, access to formal bank account, wherein we see that almost 50% of the population does not still have a formal bank account. We realize this might be due to a constraint on infrastructural bottlenecks, right? Why is that? Indonesia at best is still a group of islands, right? At best, it's not a hub and spoke model, as a result of which accessibility becomes an issue for multiple people, which hinders them from accessing banking services properly. There are other several limiting factors as well. We talk about high reliance on cash. Even in the 21st century, 50% of the transactions today which take place in Indonesia are reliant on cash. 84% of all loans are basically disbursed in two islands, Java and Sumatra, wherein we see that the geographical diversity is quite less. Tech penetration, which basically is the core of our strategy and platform, is again a problem. We have less than 31% people using smartphones, and internet penetration is also below a mere 66%. But above all, we realize that there is a high credit risk. Irrespective of the AI and the statistical models that you are able to employ, there is low availability of credit history, as a result of which it becomes difficult for you to gauge how consumers are going to be behaving in the future. As a result, we have seen a rise of non-performing loans, and basically that becomes a deterrent for any financial intermediary to go ahead and disburse these loans. Moving on, we propose 4 principal solutions to our strategy. Firstly, we believe it's now time to go ahead and leverage the untapped demographics by kicking in the network effects. What we basically mean is that every marginal customer that we want to onboard, we basically do that on our platform by giving them the exercise and the benefits of having so many other users on our platform. Secondly, with respect to the recent aggravations made by COVID 19, wherein digital penetration has been all time high, we believe that we use this opportunity to try and build Indonesia towards a cash light economy, an economy for the future. Thirdly, we use something like a unified payments interface to build world class technological infrastructure for Indonesia's stack. And lastly, we try to cover multiple entities across the value chain. It's not just the consumer, but catering to several other entities like SMEs, like other businesses, in order to what we refer to as a properly building and implementing a super application in its truest sense.
Now moving on to the idea once. Now moving on to the options that we have, right? So first we wanted to try and understand the different directions we can go in. Now when you look at it as financial intermediary, what we're basically doing is trying to bridge the gap between lenders and borrowers. This was a similar model to what we'd been doing in China. Now the difference that becomes here is that our primary value add-on is in terms of the data that we have, the insights that we can derive from that, and the actions that we can take on the basis of that. From that, if you look at peer-to-peer lending, what changes primarily is the source of funds. Instead of tying up with banks and traditional banking systems, we're looking at a larger set of individual retail investors. But when you look at both these options, given the kind of complications and constraints that Indonesian market space has, as we just learned, it serves to slow our possible progress and hinder the total market size that we can aim to aspire for. Now, because of this, and also because of the idea that these involve borrowing at their very core, and especially in peer-to-peer lending, there's a clear long-term regulatory risk. We think the ideal option for us to go ahead with is the second one, which is that of a finance super app. Now, why we think this is different is because we're changing the game. We're not looking at it in terms of our business, we're looking at it in terms of customers' needs. Customers' needs are what we try to fulfill and then drive them to our business by ensuring that we're making that a smooth process. By this, we can try and expand both in terms of breadth by even targeting those who don't necessarily need loans right now, and at the same time in depth as well by trying to offer additional services to those who actually do need our borrowing business. Now, moving on to individuals, we look at it first in terms of how we can improve and optimize our current borrowing process. And second, we look at it in terms of what we believe can be done in addition. Now, on the former, we think that especially in Indonesia, where 51% of people don't have formal bank accounts and 69% of people don't have a bank card, basically a debit card. And that bank card is a prerequisite to them engaging or taking loans from our platform, as we know. Because of that, our scope becomes severely curtailed and it becomes our burden to ensure that we're trying to bridge the gap. So here, what we propose is that we integrate a new account bank creation process on our platform itself in tie-up with certain partner banks. By doing so, we're not only able to expand our own customer base, but ensure that we can tap synergies with such banks as well. At the same time, because fintech isn't very evolved in Indonesia, there is a certain dearth of data that we have on customers, especially in the context of their credit history. That also increases our risk in terms of our operations. Now here, what we propose is that we give an opt-in mechanism to customers who are borrowing from us, wherein if they choose to give monthly financial updates, which are verified by their bank statements, we go ahead and offer them lower interest rates. Now, by doing so, we're incentivizing everyone in the system because we have a reduced default risk by virtue of additional information for credit tracking. We're able to justify giving that reduced interest rate. At the same time, the very idea that they're being tracked or they have to keep giving monthly updates, that serves as a strong incentive for them to make better use of their funds. And by that very fact reduces our default rate further. And the fact that we'll be able to take the interest rates low, that also helps us grow in a much more rapid manner. Moving on to our super app, which we named QAngan. QAngan meaning finance in Indonesian. We believe that the market today has a lot of offerings, but there's no one-stop solution. Because of that, we propose a super app which has features like e-wallets, P2P borrowers, insurance tech, and online payments in addition to our core business. What we believe here is that This becomes a hook in terms of we try to get customers first to such other offerings and try to fulfill their needs. Then we extend the line in terms of other offerings that we have, and then we guide them or nudge them to our platform, which is our sync up. Talking about our SME vertical, which is incredibly important, what we think is we need to do here is try to fulfill their needs. By doing so, we can also ensure that we're building a certain trust factor with them and by extension, the Indonesian people, which is extremely important given that major Indonesian banks are state owned and have that already. So here we propose that we offer add-on services and tools in terms of filing returns, how they can maintain a record of their sales, take digital payments, and so on. And at the same time, they also serve as a strong facilitator of our growth, which we'll come to soon. We also think it's important for us to look beyond profits, offer soft loans during times which are bad, especially like the ones right now. And that also adds on to the trust factor that I spoke of.
Our core competency lies in bringing simple but high-tech solutions to the customers. In China, because of very high internet and smartphone penetration, Finvolution did not actually face a lot of problems in trying to bring on new customers. The same is, however, not the case in Indonesia. Over 68% of the population does not have access to smartphones. Our team believes in providing equal access to all. We see an immense potential in this unbanked sector. We wish to serve them by developing an innovative method of converting grocery and general stores into kiosks in order to bridge this digital divide. The store owners will be provided a tablet and a biometric scanner, which will serve as a means of digital banking. Customers will be able to open accounts, perform debit and withdraw cash from these shops. To ensure safety of these stores, we will see to it that there isn't a lot of cash available at any point of time. There would be daily withdrawal limits for the customers. Accounts can be opened by using the KTP identity card that Indonesians have by simply providing the biometrics details. Store owners will be incentivized by providing them a transaction service charge. This will motivate them to bring on more customers on board. We also want to ensure that we are able to reach as many customers as possible in the most remote areas using these kiosks. Next slide, please, Parth. Looking beyond Indonesia. Now, since this is going to be the first time Finvolution actually enters a foreign country, Indonesia will serve as a great pilot for expansion to other nations. If the market entry is successful and we are able to reach all our targets, then we need to identify countries with similar demographics, such as Taiwan, Philippines, Singapore, and other Southeast Asian countries. And we need to perform rapid replication and expansion at scale of this model. If we feel that we need to rework our approach because we're not satisfied with the performance in Indonesia, we can try and identify what went wrong. If the super app did not appeal to the customers, then we can adopt a BFSI-driven intermediation model. If the problem was with our core offerings, then we'll need to diversify our IT-based offerings of AI fintech solutions. Next slide, please, Parth. Now let's look at our unit economics that happen in China. To put things in perspective, Finvolution currently has 108 million users on the app in China. On dividing our total revenue by 108 million, we get approximately 7.5 USD per user. Similarly, we get a per user cost at 3.5 USD and our profit comes to about $4. Next slide. Now let's try to understand our target market in Indonesia. We have about 128 million debit card users. We are targeting a 20% penetration rate in this particular sector. On a side note, this is something that we wish to achieve in the next 2 years, by the end of the 2 years. On the other hand, we have around 170 million people who do not have smartphones in Indonesia. We plan on serving this segment through our grocery store kiosks, as mentioned before. Targeting a 10% penetration rate, we come to around 17 million users over here. In all, we plan to reach 42.5 million users by the end of our second year. Next slide, please. So at the end of our second year, we will have the capacity to generate a base revenue of around 320 million, while incurring an approximate cost of around 150 million. This is the base scenario. If we're not able to reach our targets, our revenue can be less or more, as shown over here by the best case and the worst case scenario. We anticipate that the market entry cost will be something around rough 200 million USD in the first year. Next slide, please.
One of the most critical factors in determining the outcome of a business solution is timing. Let's see what we have in store for the vision ahead. In the beginning of the first 3 months, we plan to launch our services to make more and more consumers aware of this. The next step is individual optimization, which means we collaborate with banks for quick opening accounts and incentivizing good behavior, which leads to reduced defaults and expands our customer base. To assist the growth of the second step, we launched the Kungan app, which includes features such as e-wallets, insurtech, and online payments. Furthermore, in emerging markets such as Southeast Asia, SMEs are fundamental for job creation and the overall economic growth. And this is achieved by offering simple end-to-end banking solutions. Lastly, after establishing a wide consumer base, the grocery kiosk model kicks in, which is also a good marketing technique and allows for last mile connectivity of fintech solutions. Risk is another important critical factor which determines how far we go in achieving the aspired outcomes. If we look at the graph on the left, we'll see that the first box represents the highest risk and the highest intensity. This involves regulatory offerings. Therefore, we diversify our offerings so that they are suited to the different changing environment in Indonesia. Secondly, by adapting with the government norms, we maintain stronger relationship with the government, which means when there is a change in law or regulation, we are more well suited to addressing the needs of the government and therefore serving our customers. The second kind of risk is that which is low in intensity and low in possibility. These are grocery store kiosk failures. Over here, there is a certain cost and training infrastructure which goes into training the owners and managers. Secondly, we would also maintain minimum cash to elevate any risk of theft. Thirdly, we have our competition from banks and fintech international corporations. This probability is high, but the intensity is low because we will plan to collaborate with the existing banks for a more friendly relationship. And that will drive growth in many ways because we choose to collaborate and not compete. And this will also help us in striving to achieve an even larger consumer base, which is a win-win situation for everybody in the fintech environment. Next slide, please. Looking at the key outcomes on what we plan to achieve through solving this business problem in Indonesia, in the first 2.5 years, we plan to achieve a positive cash flow, and this is crucial to pivot from the P2P model to a bank-led strategy. The second and third point cover what we plan on achieving in the next 4 years. Looking at the unbanked sector, there is no formal banking for 51% of the population, which means a staggering 131.6 million people. Assuming a 15% penetration rate, we will reach 19.7 million people in this sector alone. Looking at the creditless banked part of it, there are 49% which have bank accounts, but only 13.1% with formal credit, which means 35.9% of Indonesia's population still remains. That's 92.6 million people. With a 30% penetration rate, we arrive at 27.8 million, which is somewhere around 50 million in our achievable aspirational mark. With tailor-made solutions for each geography and innovative strategies that are suited to address the largest chunk of our potential consumer base, along with risk hedge mechanism solutions, we are confident that this solution will go a long way in ensuring the overall economic growth of other countries in the Southeast Asian region.
We thank the judges for their time and we're open to questions now.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We're now ready for the Q&A session.
Great, I'll kick it off. And my first question to the team is, what are the key dependency of your strategy? Like the top thing that then might derail your strategy or make your strategy a success?
I think the idea when we engage with Indonesia and Indonesian market in such a fundamental way in terms of how they're going ahead and living their lives, especially in the context of the super app, when we're trying to onboard them in terms of variety of features, I think that sort of cultural acceptability is something that becomes a key need for us to meet. And that is why, even in terms of the timeline, we allot a fair amount of time at the start so that we ensure we're not rushing through things and we have time for our marketing efforts to kick in and actually build that kind of brand awareness, which is necessary to ensure that transition becomes smooth.
Let me try the second question. In your risk analysis, you mentioned that you're not going to be competitive against other existing banks. That sounds like a strategy. but it does not mention in the earlier presentation. So is it a part of your strategy that you're going to start with collaboration with existing banks, or how does it going to change your solution proposition in terms of mitigating this risk?
So as a part of our individual offerings, we plan to collaborate with these banks at the national level to ensure a wider customer base. And how this helps them is also coordinating them amongst various stakeholders, amongst which there are such as the consumers, which are part of our expansion strategy, and the banks in play, which will facilitate this growth. When we say we do not compete with them, it's on the hardcore level at which they are functioning. Over here, we merely serve as a facilitator, and that helps along with increasing our customer base and allowing many more banks to become part of this revolution, which will transform Indonesia in achieving the aspired visions of the economy as a whole.
Okay, thank you.
I could address the second part of the question, that is how we are actually going to go about doing this. So initially, as even Parth had mentioned during his part of the presentation, that we are going to be tying up with them in order to open new bank accounts. So that is the first step of our collaboration. Secondly, the way we operate in China is again by tying up with these banks and providing their services to the customers. So we are merely an intermediary. The loans will be provided by them, but it will be through our platform. So there is a great amount of collaboration between us and the existing banks, and we are here to serve them as well as customers as an intermediary.
Okay.
Keeping on the topic of risk, are you considering only these three categories of risk? Did you consider any other type of risk?
Yes, sir. I think largely what we're trying to basically do is get an overview of what exactly could be main things. Obviously, there might be other intricacies involved. Say, for example, when we talk about regulatory changes, I think all of that is, again, very prone to something like a change in political landscape, right? As to what happens and how sensitive that proposal is going to be, in fact, then to regulatory framework of the government. So all these things are taken into consideration, but we feel at a point in time when we're specifically trying to penetrate the Indonesian market, the obstacles that we can see arising are specifically in these areas and particularly within the specifics that will happen under these heads.
Just to add on to that quickly, sir, along with problems such as bad credit or bad intermediaries, along with the account of tech leverage that Finvolution brings to the platform and in general the whole business, we feel that these risks can be eliminated easily with the use of technology, and therefore we're focusing on those which are more area specific and geography specific in this case.
Well, you addressed my first question in terms of like the cultural acceptance as the kind of like fundamental. Can you share with us around the marketing, like the promotion strategy as you first enter into the market, and so any specific plan or steps in terms of like promoting the technology to the community, and then what might be the implication in terms of your manpower, so that get more people to understand your technology, and the cost model, because I noted that in your financial, you have assumed the same cost base as our China experience. So can I just get a bit more a deeper understanding in that?
Sure, ma'am. I'll try to address the initial few questions that you have, and I think then Jeremy can take over for the financial one. Talking about the marketing strategy and how we plan to actually penetrate the market, I think if you look at the timeline, which I hope is visible, in that sense, we're trying to take it in a staggered approach so that we can ensure that at every stage, even if suppose we believe that we have not done enough for this stage, right? So on the stage of, say, individual optimization, where we want to ensure that via our platform as well, in addition to other things happening in Indonesia, we're able to get people to bank accounts or at least get them a bank card, because without that, they cannot borrow from our platform. So if we believe that we've not had substantial enough impact there, then we try and probably delay or have some buffer before we move on to the next leg of our strategy, which is to say the super app. But in terms of the core marketing idea here as well, I think the very fact that we want to name it in the local language, I think that sort of indicates that we want to take it from the ground up rather than from the top down. Because even if you recall the pyramid that we talked of in terms of Indonesia's demography, Indonesia is a large country in terms of population. Even there, the lowest rung of the pyramid is an exceptionally large one with roughly 203 million people. But when you look at, say, figures in terms of the number of people who have bank accounts, that is something which by nature of things happens from the top down. So if you're saying 50% of the population has access to banking systems. It happens from the top and then you move downwards, rather than our services, which actually start from the bottom and you try to move upwards. I think that's the manner in which we'll be looking to bridge the gap. Jaini?
Yeah, talking about the financial side of things, if Parth, you could go back to the slide. So as far as the marketing cost goes, so when we talked about the market entry over there, our target was around serving 25 to 30 million customers in the initial period in the first few years, and then reaching 42.5 million customers by the end of the second year. So that is why we anticipated the entry cost to be roughly around 200 million, where 100 million is being spent in order to bring on more customers to establish ourselves in the market, and the 100 million remaining is being spent in trying to establish a different methods that we said, the super app, the grocery store system. So that is how we're going to divide our funds, and that is only for market entry. As we move ahead, then again and again, because we'll be conducting extensive marketing, as we've seen even in China, FinVolution is involved in a lot of marketing strategies. They are doing it through WeChat, they're doing it through television, they're doing it through various online channels. This will all be replicated over here and will be adapted according to Indonesian markets as well. So we have kept that in mind already when we consider our total cost.
Can you bring the first slide that you have? I mean, the background about the FinVolution. Yeah. So you have there, you have a good slide there, talk about the core offerings of FinVolution, right? How does these core offerings, I mean, tied up with your solution, proposition?
Right.
Just very brief.
Sure, sir. I think the idea here is that FinVolution, because it is an intermediary, most of its core offerings and even say the differentiating factors that it has in terms of the models that it has built work in the background. So even when you're saying you're continuing our core banking, our core borrowing business, the idea that there is a virtual collection agent, the idea that we're using its special bridge model to ensure we're connecting which customer we're connecting to which lender in the most optimal way, these continue to exist and these continue to be ones that help us leverage our data. It's just that because by nature they work in the background and help us optimize our decisions, we've tried to focus our energies on the strategy we wish to have for our market entry.
Okay, so you're assuming, I mean, these virtual collection agents would have easily brought into supporting Indonesia market as well.
Sir, I think the idea with regards to the tech here is that the tech, we already have the tech and we have already used it at major scales, especially all the more in China. Naturally, when you're entering a new market, it happens at a much smaller base. Even then, even if you look at the population differential, there's a pretty large multiple there. So I think at a much smaller scale, we should probably not face any key issues in terms of adapting the technology.
Okay.
Can you just elaborate? You've got a slide on the contingency, right? Success or fail, and then if fail, then what are the kind of consequential remedy? And how does it stick up to your scenario model in terms of like financial projection?
Yes, ma'am. Parth, if you go to the best and the worst case scenario slide. Yeah. So this is, again, we had anticipated what will happen in the best case, that is when both our super app and as well as our grocery store model, through which we're trying to bring the unbanked sector works. So here we will be having both of them as successful. And in the worst case scenario, we have considered the fact that we're not able to operate at a scale that we had anticipated, and that the grocery store model hasn't been able to reach the market as we had hoped. Similarly, our super app as well has not had the appeal that we would have liked. So people are not ready to switch from their other conventional banking methods to our application. And that is the worst case scenario that we have. Here we have considered very little penetration percentage. Obviously through our marketing activities and through extensively trying to convert people, we will be reaching certain figure, though it will be obviously very less compared to our anticipation and our targets. We would still be able to generate a rough 200 million revenue.
Can you go back to these the success and needs reward, the flow diagram?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So here again, we have tried to explain the same thing, that if it is a success, that is both our super app and our core borrowing business become successful, then we'll try to replicate this in other geographies that even the company Finvolution is targeting, like your Southeast Asian countries. And if not, and if we see that, this model is not going to work and we need to change certain things, like our super app is not being appealed, then we can go back to being the intermediary that we were in China. And if we feel that our core borrowing, that is a core business, is only something that is not being accepted in these countries which are more unbanked compared to China, then we have to rethink this, and we have to rethink the four core offerings, our four applications that we have, the main AI-based applications. Then we need to adapt them according to these particular countries.
At best, I think our technological foundation remains the same, right? So even pivoting, if at all it has to happen in the worst case, doesn't really cost a lot, because our technological infrastructure remains put and remains pretty much the same, irrespective of how we plan to offer our offerings to the customer.
How do you plan to break the literacy barrier?
Right. I think, sir, as you mentioned, and I think that ties in to the idea of the Indonesian population itself and its own defining characteristics. That's going to be one of our key issues. In fact, I think that is why we believe that whatever applications we are offering necessarily need to be in the local language, which is Bahasa Indonesian, as opposed to being English dominated. Even that also ties in with our idea of wanting to attack the 203 million lowest rung of the pyramid. By nature, again, that will be something where English literacy is even much more lower than the overall Indonesian population's figure. So I think in that regard, looking at local languages is one of the primary ways we have to sort of break that language barrier.
Any last minute questions, judges?
Just on this line, I mean, if you're looking beyond Indonesia, what would your suggestion? I mean, beyond Indonesia, if you've gone successful, so you say identify similar demographics. I mean, what's your next target?
Definitely. So as you had mentioned even before, other Southeast Asian countries is something even Finvolution has been targeting. So countries like Philippines or Vietnam is something that they are targeting. So we would be trying to replicate over there. Singapore is not a similar demographic because it's it has a very high internet penetration, and there's a lot of digital banking already in place. There are a lot of players already in the market. So I think Philippines is something that we can consider to be similar to Indonesia in this particular regard.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. The judges will now stay in the room to deliberate. Dear team, we will place you in the waiting room for a few minutes and bring you back again for the feedback session.